The crystal tumbler shattered against the marble floor of my private dining room, and for a split second, the only sound in the Ashford room was the soft hiss of the gas fireplace I'd had installed the previous winter. My father stood there, his knuckles still white from where he'd slammed the stack of papers down on the table, his face the color of the Cabernet he'd demanded before he even sat down. 11 years. 11 years of silence, of returned birthday cards, of phone calls that went straight to voicemail, of Christmases where I learned to decorate my own tree and cook for one. And now here he was, in the private dining room of my boutique hotel in Boston's Back Bay, demanding that I sign over 40% of my company or he would, in his words, make one phone call and have me out on the street by the end of the week. I looked at my father, really looked at him for the first time in over a decade. He was older than I remembered. His hair had gone fully silver at the temples, and there were deep grooves around his mouth that hadn't been there when I was 22. My mother sat beside him, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that I could see the tendons straining against her skin. She wouldn't meet my eyes. My sister sat to her left, picking at the edge of her napkin, and beside my sister sat a man I'd never seen before in my life, wearing a suit that cost more than it should have for someone with his employment history. "Well?" my father said, his voice the same commanding rasp I remembered from childhood, the one that used to make me flinch. "I don't have all night, Victoria. You either sign, or I make the call." I let the silence stretch. I'd learned, over the past 11 years, the power of silence. In negotiations, in boardrooms, in the quiet moments when the person across from you is expecting you to flinch, to apologize, to fill the empty space with nervous chatter. I'd spent the first 22 years of my life filling every silence my father handed me. I wasn't going to do that anymore. But before I tell you what I said, before I tell you about the 3 reveals that brought my father to his knees on the hand-woven rug I'd sourced from a small atelier in Marrakech, let me take you back. Let me take you back to the night everything ended, and the morning everything began. My name is Elena Marsh. I was born and raised in Newton, Massachusetts, a leafy suburb of Boston, where the houses all have manicured lawns and the secrets all stay behind closed doors. My father ran a regional commercial real estate firm, the kind of business that had been in our family for 3 generations, and that he never let any of us forget we owed our comfortable upbringing to. My mother stayed home, as she'd been told to do when they got married. My younger sister, Sienna, was 3 years my junior, and from the moment she could walk, she was the golden child. She was soft where I was sharp, agreeable where I asked questions, pliant where I pushed back. My father used to tell dinner guests that Sienna was the easy one. He never finished the sentence, but I always knew what came next. I was a junior at Boston University, studying hospitality management with a minor in finance, when the bottom fell out of my world. I'd come home for Thanksgiving break. I still remember the smell of the pumpkin pie my grandmother Eleanor had baked, my grandmother who was the one person in that family who had ever truly seen me. I was carrying a slice of pie up to her bedroom because she'd been too tired to come down for dinner when I heard my parents talking in my father's study. The door was cracked. I stopped just outside it. I know, now, that if I'd just kept walking, if I'd just brought my grandmother her pie and gone to bed, my entire life would have been different, but I heard my name, and I stopped. They were talking about my grandmother's trust. My grandmother, who owned the land my father's commercial real estate business had been built on. My grandmother, who had told me, on the porch swing the summer I turned 16, that she was leaving everything to me. Not to my father, who had more than enough. Not to Sienna, who would be provided for by whatever good man she married. To me. Because, she said, I reminded her of herself at my age, and because she wanted to make sure that at least one Marsh woman, in her lifetime, would never have to ask a man's permission for anything. My father was telling my mother that Grandma Eleanor had finally signed the new documents, that everything was going to Sienna instead, that he'd had his attorney draft them months ago and had been working on her slowly, wearing down an 83-year-old woman in declining health until she agreed. He said it like he was describing a business deal he was proud of. My mother made a small sound. A sound of protest, I thought, and for a moment I thought she might push back. Then she said, "And I will remember her exact tone until the day I die." "Well, you know best, Richard." I must have made a noise, because the door swung open and my father was standing there, looking down at me, the slice of pie still in my hand. I don't remember what I said. I remember screaming. I remember my grandmother's voice, calling weakly from upstairs. I remember my father taking the plate out of my hand and setting it down carefully on the hall table, because even in that moment, he couldn't bear the thought of cranberry filling on his antique runner. And then I remember him telling me that I had until morning to be out of his house. My mother didn't come to my bedroom that night. Sienna did, briefly, to tell me that I was being dramatic and that I was ruining Thanksgiving. I packed 2 suitcases. I had maybe $300 in my checking account, the remnants of my summer hostessing job at a restaurant on the Cape. My college tuition, I would learn the next week when I tried to register for spring classes, had been paid through the end of the fall semester, and not a day beyond. My father had called the bursar's office that morning. I went upstairs before I left, at 5:30 in the morning, to say goodbye to my grandmother. She was awake. I think she'd been awake all night. She pressed something into my hand. A small leather envelope. She told me not to open it until I was far away from that house. She told me she was sorry. She told me she loved me. She died 6 weeks later, and I was not permitted at the funeral. The envelope contained a handwritten letter and the contact information for an attorney in Providence, Rhode Island. The letter said that my grandmother had known, for at least a year, what my father was planning, that she had been playing along, that she had signed 2 sets of documents that day, and that the ones my father had witnessed were fakes she'd had drawn up by a friend at her bridge club, whose husband happened to be a retired estate attorney. The real documents, the ones that would hold up in any court in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, were with the attorney in Providence. The entire estate, when probated, would come to me. But, she warned, I was not to contact the attorney or claim the inheritance until 5 years had passed from the date of her death. She wanted me to build something first, on my own. She wanted me to know what I was capable of before the money came. She wanted the girl she'd raised on that porch swing to exist in the world, fully formed, before she handed her the kingdom. So I didn't tell anyone. Not my roommate who let me sleep on her couch in Alston for 4 months. Not the restaurant manager who hired me to wait tables at a seafood place in the North End. Not the professor at BU who heard what happened and quietly helped me transfer to a state school where I could pay in-state tuition by working 3 jobs and taking out modest loans. I finished my degree in hospitality management in 3.5 years. I graduated summa cum laude. Nobody from my family came to the ceremony. Nobody from my family knew I'd graduated. For the next 4 years, I worked. I worked as a front desk clerk at a mid-tier hotel in Cambridge. Then as a night manager at a boutique property in the South End. Then as the director of operations for a small hospitality group that owned 3 inns in coastal Maine. I learned every single corner of the business. I learned what guests wanted before they knew they wanted it. I learned how to read a profit and loss statement in my sleep. I learned how to fire people kindly and hire people carefully. I met my best friend, Priya Carr, who was the food and beverage director at the hotel in Cambridge, and who became, over those long years, the sister I'd never actually had. I met my husband, a quiet architect named David Chen, who designed the lobby of a hotel I was consulting on and who asked me to dinner 3 weeks later and who has never, in the 6 years we've been together, once asked me to make myself smaller. And then, on the 5th anniversary of my grandmother's death, I drove to Providence. The estate was worth $11.4 million. Most of it was in the form of land holdings and a small portfolio of index funds that my grandmother had, it turned out, been quietly managing herself for decades without telling anyone in the family. There was also a letter, a second letter, in which my grandmother told me that she had one final piece of advice. She said that when I decided what to do with the money, I should do it in a way that my father would never ever see coming. She said that men like my father believed that money flowed in straight lines, from fathers to sons, from the powerful to the dutiful. She said that I should let the money flow like water, She said I should buy the ground he was standing on. I did not buy my father's business. That would have been too obvious, too direct, and too small. Instead, I partnered with Priya, and we spent the next 3 years quietly acquiring three things. We bought a distressed but beautiful historic property on Commonwealth Avenue, the kind of place that had been a grand hotel in the 1920s and had fallen into disrepair as a mid-priced tourist trap, and we restored it. We named it the Marsh Ashford, after my grandmother's maiden name, which no one in my immediate family had ever used for anything. We opened it to rave reviews 18 months before the night my father walked back into my life. The second thing we bought, through a holding company whose name appeared on no documents connected to me, was a 3-building commercial complex in the Seaport District that happened to include, among its tenants, the new satellite office of my father's real estate firm. He was leasing the ground floor and mezzanine level. He did not know who his landlord was. The lease was managed by a property management firm, which was managed by another property management firm, which was managed by a holding company registered in Delaware. My husband, who handled the architecture on all our acquisitions, had been in the building 4 times during renovations. My father had probably walked past him in the lobby. The third thing we bought, just 6 months before that November evening, was a 20% stake in a mid-sized investment firm called Hartwell Capital. Hartwell Capital was the lender of record on roughly $4 million of outstanding debt that my father's company had taken on to fund its seaport expansion. I sat on the board. I had never attended a meeting in person. I communicated through proxies and through Priya, who was the managing partner on record. My father, again, had no idea. None of this was for revenge. I want to be clear about that. I had spent 11 years building a life so full and so good that the idea of revenge, for most of those years, felt like a child's fantasy I'd outgrown. I had a husband. I had a best friend. I had a golden doodle named Biscuit. I had a thriving business. I had Thanksgivings that actually felt like Thanksgivings, with Priya's enormous extended family filling our dining room in Brookline, and nobody telling anybody else to get out of the house. The holdings were insurance. They were what my grandmother had told me to build. They were the quiet knowledge that if my father ever came for me again, I would be standing on ground he did not know I owned. And then, on a rainy Tuesday in early November, my concierge called me at home to tell me that a party of 4 had requested the Ashford Room, our private dining suite, for the following Friday night, and that the gentleman who had made the reservation had specifically asked that the hotel's owner be present at 7 o'clock to discuss a family matter. The gentleman's name was Richard Marsh. I did not cry. I did not call my husband in a panic. I sat at my kitchen island, and I drank the cup of tea that had gone cold beside me, and I thought for a long time. And then I called Priya. And then I called our attorney. And then I made 3 other phone calls, the content of which I will come back to shortly. And then I went about my week. Friday evening, I stood in the doorway of the Ashford Room and watched my family arrive. My father had aged. My mother was smaller than I remembered, as if she had been slowly folding herself inward for the past decade. Sienna looked expensive and brittle. The man with her, whom she introduced as her husband, was named Connor Whitfield, and he had the kind of face that men who live off other people's money tend to acquire in their 40s, soft around the edges and sharp where it mattered. He gave me a look, when we were introduced, that told me he had no idea who I really was, and that my father had told him this was going to be easy. My father did most of the talking, at first. He complimented the wine selection. He complimented the room, in a patronizing way, the way you'd compliment a child's drawing. He told me that he had been following my little venture from afar, and was proud, in a way, of what I had accomplished. My mother did not speak. Sienna drank her wine. Connor watched me with the expression of a man calculating numbers in his head. And then, over the main course, my father set down his fork and said he had come to discuss what he called the family legacy. He said that Grandma Eleanor's estate had been improperly handled. He said that the attorney in Providence had taken advantage of an elderly woman's confusion in her final weeks. He said that he had been consulting with his own attorneys for several years now, and that he was prepared to pursue legal action to have the trust reopened, which would, he said, expose me to years of litigation and publicity that would destroy the reputation of my hotel. Unless I was willing to sign a simple agreement transferring 40% ownership of my business to a family trust, which he would, naturally, administer. As a courtesy, he said, he was giving me until the end of the evening to sign. And then, just in case I was not sufficiently motivated, he said the thing that had made him feel so clever all week. He said that he happened to know, through a colleague in the industry, that my hotel's lease on the parking structure across the street was up for renewal in January. He said he had been in conversations with the owner of that parking structure, a man he called Harrison Pell, and that Harrison had agreed to, as he put it, reconsider the renewal if my father asked him to. He said that a boutique hotel in Back Bay without guest parking was not, in his experienced opinion, a viable business. That was when he slammed the papers down. That was when the tumbler hit the floor. That was when my mother's hands went white in her lap. I did not speak immediately. I walked, very slowly, to the sideboard, and I picked up a small leather folio that I had placed there earlier that afternoon. I walked back to the table. I set the folio down, unopened, in front of my father, and then I sat. Before I respond, I said, and it was the first full sentence I had spoken to any of them in 11 years, I want to make sure we all have the same information. I opened the folio. The top document was a deed. I slid it across the table to my father. He glanced at it, and then his face changed. The deed was for the parking structure across the street from my hotel. The one he'd just threatened to have Harrison Pell revoke my lease on. The one I had purchased, through Priya's holding company, 18 months ago. Harrison Pell had sold it to us and retired to Sarasota. My father had been speaking with a man who had no authority over anything. I own the parking structure, Dad, I said. I hadn't called him that in 11 years, and the word felt foreign in my mouth. I have for a year and a half. Harrison moved to Florida. I don't know who you've been talking to, but it wasn't him. My father's mouth opened. It closed. I slid the second document across. It was the lease agreement for the ground floor and mezzanine of the building in the Seaport District. His company's lease. With my company's name, through our holding structure, listed as the landlord. I had instructed our attorney to have the ownership trail simplified, just for tonight, so that my father would be able to follow it. I own the building your satellite office is in, I said. I bought it 2 years ago. Your rent has been paid, on time, to a property management company that works for me. My sister made a small sound. My mother closed her eyes. I slid the third document. This one was from Hartwell Capital. It showed the outstanding loan balance. It showed the board composition. It showed, highlighted in yellow, my name as a 20% owner and a sitting board member. I own a fifth of the company that holds $4 million of your company's debt, I said. I've been sitting on the board for 6 months. I haven't voted against you on anything yet. I wanted to see what you'd do. My father, for the first time in my entire life, had nothing to say. And then I turned to Connor Whitfield, Sienna's husband, who had been sitting very still for the past 3 minutes. Connor, I said, and I watched his face do something complicated. How long have you been at Ridgeline Advisory? He mumbled something. 4 years. Do you know who owns Ridgeline Advisory? I asked. He did not know. Ridgeline Advisory had been acquired, quietly, 8 months earlier, by a fund that Priya and I co-managed. We had been reviewing personnel files for the past several months as part of a routine audit. Connor Whitfield had been flagged for expenses that did not match his client load. I had sent his file to the head of compliance that morning. The internal investigation, our compliance officer had informed me, would begin Monday. Sienna looked at her husband. I watched her face change. It was not, I realized, surprise. It was recognition. She had known, on some level. She had known, and she had brought him here tonight because my father had told her that this was going to be a payday. My mother started to cry. I want to say something, I said, and I kept my voice even, because I had spent 11 years learning how to keep my voice even. Grandma Eleanor knew what you were doing, Dad. She knew for over a year before she signed anything. The documents you witnessed weren't the real ones. The real ones were with an attorney you never knew about, and they were airtight. She told me, the morning you threw me out of the house, that she wanted me to build something before the money came to me. She wanted me to know who I was before I had the resources to prove it. So I did. I built all of this. The hotel, the company, a life. I built it with my best friend, and with my husband, neither of whom you've met, and neither of whom owes you a single thing. I built it without any of you. And I built it better than you could have imagined, because you never imagined I was capable of anything. My father opened his mouth. I held up my hand. I was not finished. You will not be pursuing any legal action regarding Grandma's estate, I said. If you try, you will lose. And the public record of your loss will end your business and your reputation in this city. You will also not be renewing your lease at the Seaport location. I'm terminating it at the end of the quarter. You have 90 days to find new space. Hartwell Capital will be calling your loan on the standard timeline. I'm not going to accelerate it. I'm also not going to extend it. You can refinance with someone else, or you can sell assets to pay it off. That's your decision. Connor had gone pale. Sienna was staring at the table. My mother was still crying, silently, into a cloth napkin. Mom, I said. And she looked up at me. And for the first time in 11 years, I saw her as a person, and not as an absence. I don't hate you. I don't have the energy to hate you. But you sat in that study 11 years ago, and you said you know best, Richard. And that sentence cost me my family, my college tuition, my grandmother's funeral, and the first 11 years of my adult life. You have my phone number. Priya will send it to you on Monday if you don't. If you ever want to have coffee with your daughter, just you, without him, I'll consider it. That's the best I can do right now. She nodded. She kept nodding, as if she couldn't stop. Sienna, I said, and my sister lifted her face. I hope you figure out what you want your life to be. I don't think you have, yet. I don't think Connor is going to be part of it for much longer. When you do figure it out, if it ever involves wanting to know me, the door isn't closed. It's not open either. But it isn't closed. And then I looked at my father one last time. He had aged 10 years in the past 20 minutes. His hand, the hand that had slammed the papers down, was shaking slightly against the tablecloth. Dad, I said. I don't want an apology. I wouldn't believe it. I want you to leave my hotel. And I want you to understand that every piece of ground you thought you were standing on tonight, you were standing on because I let you. That's all. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my dress. I walked to the door of the Ashford room. At the door, I turned back. Because there was one more thing. Grandma Eleanor told me, when I was 16, I said, that she wanted at least one Marsh woman to exist in the world without ever having to ask a man's permission for anything. I just wanted you to know. It worked. I left them there. I walked through the lobby of my hotel, past the concierge desk where a young woman named Kaylee was checking in a couple celebrating their anniversary, and out onto Commonwealth Avenue, where my husband was waiting with the car. Priya was in the passenger seat. Biscuit the golden doodle was in the back. They had been circling the block for an hour. I got in the car. I did not cry until we were 2 blocks away. And when I cried not for what I'd lost, but for the girl who had carried that slice of pumpkin pie up the stairs 11 years ago, for the 22-year-old who had packed 2 suitcases at 5:30 in the morning, for the version of me who didn't yet know that the inheritance she was carrying out of that house wasn't her grandmother's money at all. It was her grandmother's belief in her. It was the belief that no one in that dining room tonight, not my father, not my mother, not my sister, had ever thought to give me. That was almost 2 years ago now. My mother and I have coffee once a month. It is careful, and it is small, but it is real. Sienna filed for divorce 6 weeks after that dinner. She has not reached out, and I have not either. But I hear through my mother that she is in therapy, which is more than I expected. My father sold his Seaport office space. refinanced his loan with a smaller lender, and has, I am told, not mentioned my name in a family gathering since. Grandma Eleanor's portrait, which I had restored from an old photograph, hangs in the main dining room of my hotel. I walk past it every morning. Some mornings I stop. Some mornings I just nod. Family, I've learned, is not blood. Family is the people who, when you walk into a room carrying 11 years of silence, stand up and hand you the keys to the car and tell you they'll drive you home. Love beats blood. It beats it every single time. And the people who underestimate the women they were supposed to raise tend, eventually, to find out that those women grew up anyway, with or without their permission, and that they grew up into something they never bothered to imagine. That is a lesson my grandmother taught me. It is the lesson I am trying, in my small way, to pass on. I hope, if you have heard any of yourself in my story tonight, that you can hear it too.